All right. Hello, everyone. How is it going? Happy D3 week. We just had an awesome lunch here for staff at the national office celebrating Division 3 week. We had a really great Special Olympics panel, and I'm all sorts of pumped up, and I'm ready for this webinar. This month, we are calling it Spring Cleaning, Playing in Practice Seasons. And if we've never met before, my name is Corey. I'm on the Division 3 Governance and Membership Services staff. I'm presenting solo this month, but as always, I've got Bryn on the webinar with me. She's keeping an eye on things for us, making sure that all the slides that we're going to go through today and the recording of this webinar find our way to the D3 webinar page on ncaa.org. As always, feel free to use the Q&A function to send in the questions that you have along the way. I'll try to get to as many of those as we can before we close out our 30 minutes. So as with any spring cleaning, we're going to do a little bit of everything on this webinar. We're going to jump around bylaw 17 a bit, covering the parts that staff thinks are really important and mix that in with some of the stuff that we've been getting a lot of questions from you all lately. And we're going to start with the start date. So I think most of you know this already, but we have a really handy start date calculator on the Division 3 compliance page on ncaa.org. The screenshot that you see on this slide is what that calculator looks like. It can be super helpful when you need to calculate the start date for fall sports, except football because they do their own thing. But the calculator isn't really helpful or even needed for winter sports or spring sports. And the great question is, well, why is it needed for winter and spring sports? Those sports have practice start dates and competition start dates that are actually legislated in the bylaws. So all you need to go to is the appropriate bylaw for winter and spring sports. You don't actually need to do any of the counting that we're going to be talking about here on the next couple slides. Also important to note that the calculator doesn't just pull dates out of thin air. There is a whole formula that it uses to help you out and to give you your earliest start dates for your fall teams, which means that the calculator online is not the only tool that you have at your disposal to help you figure out these start dates and to help your fall sports plan. You can actually use the formula, and that's what we're really going to focus on today. Without the bylaw that you see on this slide, it's 1702.12.2, there would be no online calculator. This bylaw is the one that lays out the exact process that you should follow to calculate that first permissible practice date for your fall sports. And before we get into the formula and before your eyes glaze over because I'm saying words like formula and calculator and calculate over and over again, please know you do not have to be a math major to get this. What the formula is good for is it helps you count. So we're not actually doing any math here. We're really just counting. And we're counting, more specifically, we're counting units. So all of the units are part of this formula. They don't actually represent anything about how you can or should or must conduct your season. They're just helping you find that start date. And as you're going to see on the next slide, the formula talks about skipping Sundays. And again, this is all just for counting purposes. It doesn't mean that you can't actually have athletically related activities or practice on Sundays. It's just a formula to get you to that start date. So that's probably as clear as mud, but hopefully over the next couple of slides, I'm going to outline the formula for you. We're going to go through a couple of examples, and it's going to become a little bit more clear. So this is it. I would screenshot this slide, print it out, somehow save it to your desktop, share it with your fall coaches, because in a world, if the internet goes down or the calculator hasn't changed to the new academic year, or AI makes you question all of your life choices, this is how you're going to do things by hand. First thing, as I kind of alluded to on the previous slide, is you're always going to skip Sundays when you count units. You're also going to skip any days where your dorms are closed and you can't be on campus and no practice is taking place. That's kind of a no-brainer. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get to the counting and we're going to dole out 16 units. That's what bylaw 1702.12.2 talks about, how to count those 16 units. The first 6 units go on the 6 calendar days leading up to the first permitted contest date for your sport. Not a scrimmage, not an exhibition, but the first full-on contest. And even if you don't have a contest scheduled for that date, if you want to make the most out of your preseason, make sure that you're counting back from your first permitted date, not necessarily your first schedule date. Then once we get those 6 units taken care of, for the other 10, you're assigning 1 unit to each day on or after the first day of class. And then you're assigning 2 units each day to all of the days before the first day of class until you hit 16. Once you hit 16, whether that's a day with 2 units or 1, that is your first permissible start date. Okay? So I'm going to show you some examples. This is a calendar for August and the beginning of September of 2026. So we are doing this fall, and we are going to pretend like we are an institution that has a first class date for the fall term of Thursday, August 20th. Just an example, you may have to adjust based on your individual school's actual class date, but we're going to go with August 20th for this example. And because we're doing this for fall sports, we know, thanks to our bylaws, that the first permitted contest for fall sports this year is September 1. So you can see those both reflected on the calendar. Now we're going to start counting. So let's remember the formula from the previous slide. Step 1, skip the Sundays. Step 2, we don't have any of those weird days where the dorms are closed. So we're going to start assigning out our 16 units with the first 6 of those days leading up to September 1, our first permissible contest. There we go. Now, we've still got some days between Thursday, the 20th, our first day of class, and the units that we've already doled out. So we are going to put 1 unit on the first day of class and all the days in between. You can see that by the yellow X's. And 6 units plus 4 units means we've used 10 so far. We've got 6 left to assign. Every day ahead of the first day of class gets 2 units until we get to 16 total. There's the final 6. And where have we landed? We've landed on August 17th. So if you are an institution who has a first day of class this fall of August 20th, and your fall sports other than football, because again, football does its own thing and has its own way of counting, you can start your fall teams practicing as early as August 17th. Not too bad. All right, we're going to do another example. Calendar looks really similar to the last one we just did, except the difference here is that this institution's first day of class is actually after the first permitted contest date for fall sports. So that's September 1, first permitted contest date, staying the same, September 1, here on the Tuesday, you see it. And then we're going to pretend that this institution's first class date is Thursday, September 3rd. And then we're just going to go through the exact same process we went on the previous slide, starting with our Sundays, skip and skip. Then we're going to hand out our first 6 units. So on each of the 6 days leading up to the first contest date, that looks exactly like it did on the previous slide. Now, this is where our first example and this example are a little bit different. Remember on the previous slide, we assigned those yellow X's because there were still days between the first day of class and our first 6 units. That's not the case for this school because their first day of class is actually after the first permitted contest. It's on September 3rd. It's not on August 20th. So that means we don't have to worry about any of those yellow X's that we worried about on the previous example. We're just going to go right to assigning 2 units a day until we get to 16 total. So we've used our first 6 leading up to the first permissible contest. Our remaining 10 are going 2 a day. And we get back to August 19th. So if you are an institution who has a first day of class actually after your first permitted contest, that is going to affect what your ultimate start date is. You're a couple days later than the institution that we saw in the previous example who had an earlier first date of fall classes. So again, it sounds way more complicated than it is. If you are a new compliance officer or you just like puzzles and piecing things together, try doing it by hand and then use the start date calculator to check your work on the back end. It can be a little fun. It's a little game. But again, if you're like a super early bird planner and the calculator hasn't flipped yet, you don't trust the calculator, or again, you just want to check your work, here's how you do it by hand. Okay, one topic down. Our next one, I wanted to take a couple of minutes to revisit our winter sport season structure, because over the last couple of weeks, staff has got a flurry of questions about winter sports and specifically those 8 days or up to 8 days that winter sports teams can use outside of the season if they choose. So we're going to start with the actual bylaw. It is 17.122, Part B, Part 2, and that outlines how, if your team chooses to save up to 8 days of their 114 to use outside of the season, how that can be done or how can't it be done. So what you really want to be tracking on if you have a team that wants to save days is that those days can't be used before the first day of classes in the fall. They can't be used 5 weekdays before an exam period or during that exam period. They can't be used during the summer vacation period. And if you want to save a bunch of them, you can't use more than 3 days during any one 7-day period. So keep those in mind. And then I'm going to show you a couple of questions that we've been getting lately about these 8 days. So the first one, does my team have to save days to use outside of the season? Nope. Totally up to each institution's team whether or not they do it. You might have men's basketball being like, heck yeah, I'm going to save 8 days to use outside of my season. And women's basketball is like, meh, we're good. We're going to use all 114 days during the season. Totally fine. So again, each winter sport team chooses how to use its 114 days. So each of the 3 examples that I have there on the slide, so using all 114 during the season, absolutely an option. Using 106 during, saving all 8 to use outside, love that for you if you choose to do it. Or if you do something kind of in the middle. So let's say you use 110 days during the season and save 4 to use outside. Absolutely an option as well. All of these are permissible things that your teams, your winter sport teams, can do when they think about mapping out their seasons and planning their days. All right. Other question that we've been getting lately. What if my team uses fewer days during the season? Do we get more days to use on the outside? That question is also a no. So the kind of explanation analysis here is whether your team chooses to use everything during the season or it chooses to save days to use on the outside of the season, your team is still maxed out at 114 days total, and you only get up to 8 that can be used on the outside. So previous slide had some examples of how you can save, but let's say you had a swimming and diving team that only used 95 days during the season. Do they get, the math in my head, 19 days to use on the outside? Or no, that's not enough. Is it? Do they get more than 8? The answer is no. And I promised myself there'd be no math. So now I'm making a fool of myself on this webinar in front of all of you. But the answer is the same. If you have more than 8 days to give, you're still only maxed out at 8 days outside of the season. And now I'm starting to confuse myself. We're going to move on to our third topic, from the 8 days to days off. And days off is something that's not just limited to winter sports. I'm talking about all sports, all seasons here. And then this is the bylaw that's in play. It's 17-141, and it says that all teams have to have at least 1 calendar day off per defined week during their declared season. There are only 3 circumstances that you don't need that day off each week, and they're up here on the slide. So you don't need a day off during participation in the NCAA championships. You don't need a day off if it's between academic terms when classes are not in session, or it's during your institution's preseason practice that occurs before the first day of class. And then the third situation, you don't need a day off if it's during a week that includes an official institutional vacation period and classes are not in session for any portion of that week. So think maybe like a spring break type situation. All other situations, you need to be giving your student athletes at least 1 calendar day off from athletically related activities. And there's that long list at the beginning of bylaw 17 about what athletically related activities are. And you need to do that consistently throughout the team's whole declared season. But I've got 2 fun facts for you when it comes to the days off, and ways that maybe seem a bit more flexible than bylaw 14-141 sounds, but are perfectly in compliance. And here's the first one. There is an exception. It's 14-141 for swimming and diving teams, and for track and field teams. Different student athletes can actually have different days off for the week. So instead of the day completely off being applied to the team as a whole, the day off in those sports can be applied individually to different student athletes on the team. And then in those sports, even if the coaching staff is conducting athletically related activities like practice and or competition for 7 days in a row, that track and field team or that swimming and diving team is only going to be docked 6 out of their 114 or their 144 day count, depending on the sport. The chart that you see here at the bottom of the screen is kind of like a visual representation of this fun fact. So you can see here, our shot putter has off on Thursday. Our hurdler, they got sick earlier in the week, but their official day off was Friday. And then our pole vaulter, they had an exam where they missed practice on Wednesday, but their official day off was Sunday. We would say that this track and field team is in compliance because all of the student athletes had 1 full day off from athletically related activities. And even though across all 3 student athletes, there's an X every day of the week, the coaches are conducting athletically related activities with someone from Monday to Sunday, that track and field team's only going to get charged 6 of their total days. This track and field team, totally in compliance. My other fun fact for this days off bylaw is, yes, bylaw 17-141 requires you to have a full day off each defined week of your season. But the fun fact is that day does not have to be the same day each week. And you might be thinking like, Corey, what the heck are you talking about here? So here's an example. Let's say we're working with a team that defines its week as Wednesday through the next Tuesday. That's how they choose to define their season. If that team takes the first day of this week off, they would be taking off Wednesday this week. Great. If they then take the last day of next week off, they take a week from Tuesday off, the last day of the next week. That means this team is going to be participating in athletically related activities for 12 straight days. They're taking the first day off this week, the last day off next week, and everything in between. They're practicing or competing or lifting or watching film. This is totally fine legislatively. Is it the best idea for your sport and for your student athletes and health and safety and well-being and all of that? I'm going to leave that up to you and to your athletic training staff and your medical staff. But when it comes down to the bylaws, this is completely fine. So talk to your coaches if they're trying to get creative, depending on what time of year it is, how much you're competing, whether you're in like a heavy training period or not. There is some flexibility when it comes to the requirement to have a day off. You got to have one for each defined week, but it doesn't have to be the same day in each of those defined weeks. All right, last topic. We are going to talk about classifying contests. And we're going to start with a really common question that we get a lot in RSRO. Your Division III institution or your team wants to call it a contest, but whoever you're playing against doesn't want to have it count towards their win-loss record. They want to call it a scrimmage. Is that okay? And the answer is, it depends on who you're playing. We have a really helpful official interpretation in LSDBI. It's dated February 25th, 2016. And if you are playing another Division III institution, you have to classify the contest the same way. It's either got to be a contest that's countable for both of you, it's got to be a scrimmage for both of you, it's got to be a joint practice for both of you. If, on the other hand, you are playing a non-D3 opponent, D1, D2, NAIA, someone else, you can classify things differently. It could count for you, but not for them. It could count for them, but not for you. As long as everyone's on the same page and the designation of that contest is made before the contest starts and it doesn't change while the contest is going on, you're A-okay. And then I wanted to close out by taking a closer look at contests, because when we think about contests in the Bylaw 17 context, we think not about sports sponsorship minimums like we think about in Bylaw 20. In Bylaw 17, we think about contest maximums. So every sport has a section of Bylaw 17 that lists the maximum number of contests or dates of competition that your student athletes and your institutional teams can compete in each year. And for the most part, everything against outside competition has to count towards those maximums, unless you have the ability to exempt that contest or that date. So luckily, there is a list of exemptions that every team has access to on an annual basis. And where you find that list is in Bylaw 17-1451. So the best way for me to kind of show you how contest maximums and exemptions and scrimmages and exhibitions kind of all play nicely together is to use an actual question that we get from the membership without fail every year going into the fall. And it is some version of this question that just popped up on the screen. Every year we get at least a handful of institutions being like, we got you, staff, because we found a typo in the manual, specifically in the soccer bylaw, because it says that we can have up to 3 preseason scrimmages, but our exemptions say we only get 2 annual exemptions a year. So that's a typo. How does it work? And I'm going to help you figure out how it works. If you ask this question or some version of this question in RSRO, you are going to get some version of this answer on this slide, minus the color coding, of course, because I have not figured out how to do color coding in RSRO yet. But you ask this question, you're going to get this answer, and we're going to break it down. So it's going to start by saying, you're right. The soccer bylaw says that your team can participate in up to 3 scrimmages or joint practices or exhibitions before your first permitted date of competition, and those scrimmages or those exhibitions don't have to count in your team's win-loss record. That is your sport-specific bylaw. Then, on top of that, you've got bylaw 171451, which is also true and says you can exempt up to 2 of those scrimmages or exhibitions or joint practices that don't have to be counted in your bylaw 1720 maximum soccer contests. That's your exemption bylaw. Now, when you think about how they work together, you can get up to 3 scrimmages before your first game. None of those scrimmages or exhibitions or joint practices have to count in your win-loss record, but you can only exempt 2 of them from your bylaw 17 maximums. So if you do play all 3 scrimmages in soccer before your first contest date and you exempt 2 of them, the third one has to count towards your 20 maximum contests in that sport, even though it's not counting towards your team's win-loss record. That is how both the exemption bylaw and the sport-specific bylaw work in harmony. And that is how each year when we think someone's spotting an error in the manual, we explain that actually it's just 2 different bylaws focusing on 2 different parts of the legislation. Oops. All right. So I am at the end. I know I didn't take any breaks today, but that's because I had a lot of material. I'm going to dive into the Q&A and see if we have any questions. First one. Corey, does your team plan to update the playing and practice season documents? Excellent question. And the answer is yes. The thing that we need to update on those one-pagers, we've got one for each of the seasons, is the charts at the bottom that show the NCAA selection dates each year. And then on the spring one, it shows not only the NCAA selection dates, but also the 15-week back date where you can start to practice and compete. We were just waiting on our friends and champs to get us all of the updated dates. We have them. So we will very soon be updating all of those charts on the one-page resources. I will also say that when the 26-27 version of the manual comes out, head to the back of bylaw 17 because those dates will also be in the manual. Got a question about scrimmages and exemptions and things after the first official contest for a team. Really great question. Also something we get a ton. Theoretically, you can scrimmage or exhibition or joint practice whenever you like in the season. There's nothing that says that it has to be before your first official contest. They may be, but they don't have to be. Similarly, there's nothing in the bylaw that says you have to use your exemptions by a specific date. So let's say you are a volleyball team and you have a preseason scrimmage and you exempt it. You have done a preseason scrimmage. It's not counting to your win-loss record. You've exempted it, so it's not going to count towards your bylaw 17 maximum for volleyball, but you only use one of your exemptions. You can totally start to play some of your season and then sometime in October, decide to exempt another contest. You have the ability to be flexible about when you use things, how you use things, how much you use things. There might be, temptation to really play a lot of exhibitions and a lot of scrimmages, right? Because then they don't affect your win-loss record. Maybe if you exempt some of them, they don't count to your maximums. But you know what? A ton of exhibitions and a ton of scrimmages aren't going to help with your in-region percentage to qualify for AQs. So you always got to kind of think of that in the back of your head as well. I know we're at time and I see some more questions coming in. So we can copy these questions down. I can shoot out some answers. Fun fact, Bryn, if she hasn't done it already, is going to share the Q&A from yesterday's NCAID and transfer portal webinar. So we can do something similar with these questions that are coming in. Or as always, you can always hit me up, hit the staff up in RSRO, and we will get your questions answered. So wanted to say thank you for tuning in today. Also, just so you know, a month from today or next month, the May webinar date is actually regional rules. So come hang out with us in Atlanta or tune in virtually, get that regional rules attendance credit. We will not have a webinar in May for the compliance side. Tune in to regional rules, you'll get it all. And then we'll pick back up with our second Wednesday of the month at 1:30 once June rolls around. So hope everyone's well. See you soon and talk to you later. Bye.